Hey guys, Mr. Wiz here. It is time for us to start coding again. So up until now, we've built a couple simple games. We had the clicker game and we had the chasing game. Well, one of my favorite style games is projectile games. These are very common, very high energy, exciting games. And before we can start building those, it's time for me to show you how to build projectiles. So let's go ahead and get started. As always, make sure you are signed in. Look for your initials or your picture in the top right corner there. If it says sign in, you're not signed in. So we're going to create a new project. I'm going to call this project Asteroids, and it's because we're going to build an asteroid game as our first projectile game. So I would recommend you go ahead and call yours Asteroids 2. We will be coming back to this program again in the future, probably a few times if I'm being honest with you. So how do you build projectiles? What are projectiles? Let's talk about it. In the sprite section, you have this red block, which we've used many times for creating simple sprites. Projectiles are a type of sprite, so they are in the sprite section, but we're not going to use this block. If you scroll down, there are actually two projectile blocks here that you'll see. Let's talk about the differences between these two blocks. So the one says projectile from my sprite, and the other one says projectile from side. So first off, let's talk about what a projectile is. In the sense of a video game and coding like we're doing here, MakeCode thinks of projectiles as basically objects that shoot in a straight line, right? So these could be, if you're building a shooter type game, or maybe you're shooting zombies or you're just shooting aliens or something like that, it could be a projectile, could be something that comes from the player, where maybe it's pellets or bullets or lasers that you're firing from the player. That is a type of projectile. It shoots in a straight line, right? Projectiles could also come from enemies, though. So if you're shooting alien spaceships, for instance, they might be shooting you back. So they could be projectiles coming towards you from another object in the game. These types of projectiles that I just described, coming from a player or coming from another sprite, those were the ones you would use this first block for, where it says projectile from my sprite, because you can change my sprite to be whatever sprite is in your game, right? So if it's a projectile coming from a sprite, this is the block you would use. The from side is a projectile that's coming off the side of the screen. So for instance, I mentioned a zombie game where you might be shooting at zombies. Well, what if these zombies are coming from the side of the screen? They're not coming from a base, they're not coming from a house, they're just coming from off the side of the screen where you don't even know exactly where they're coming from. If those zombies are moving in a straight line, then technically they're a projectile. So either one of these could be used for that sort of situation, depending on what type of projectile you're working with. So for what we're doing, we're going to be building an asteroid game where we're going to have a spaceship, and that's going to be shooting at asteroids, and the asteroids are going to be coming from the side of the screen. So we're actually going to be using both of these blocks in a moment. Before we do that, let's go ahead and create the spaceship that we're going to be using. So up here at the very top of the sprite section, I'm going to set my sprite to, and I'm just going to create the player character, which will be a simple spaceship. And I'm just going to grab one from the gallery. Now, they don't actually have spaceships in the gallery, but they do have something that's kind of spaceship-like, and that's these little triangular shaped doodads, right? So there's a red one, an orange one, a purple, a blue, and a green. I'm going to go with the red one here. And I'm going to use the rotation tool to rotate it so it's pointing towards the right, because I'm going to have my player on the left side of the screen shooting at asteroids that are coming from the right side of the screen. That's going to be how I'm going to be designing this game. I would encourage you to follow along with me, because as I said, we are going to be coming back to this program later on to make edits to it. So I've got my player. I rotated him so he's pointing the right direction. I'm going to change his position. So he's already in the center of the screen. That kind of makes it easy for me. So I could use the set position block like we've done before, where it sets his X and his Y. But in this case, I don't really need to change his Y position. His Y position is good. He's in the middle of the screen. I just need him on the left side. So instead of using this one, the set position, I'm just going to use the one below it to set the X. So here I can set one particular stat, right? In this case, I have X and Y here. I'm going to set his X position to be towards the left side of the screen. If I do 0, it'll be too far to the left. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, he actually goes off the screen because it's centering the middle of the sprite to the 0 position, which is actually kind of neat because I could go down here and I could choose maybe the left edge. So rather than centering the center of it at 0, I could choose to make the left side of the sprite at 0. That'll put him right along the edge of the screen. That's actually pretty good. That's pretty good. I like that. But if I want there to be a little bit of a gap, I could also just put a number in here to give a little space, maybe 5 pixels. And now he's 5 pixels from the edge of the screen. Oh, that looks really good. I like that a lot. So I'll leave that there. So I've got my sprite. He's on the left side of the screen, almost all the way to the edge, but I gave him a little bit of a gap there. And it's ready to start giving controls to. So I'm going to go to the controller section, and I'm going to grab the Move My Sprite with Buttons block to give it player controls. So now I should be able to use my arrow keys or WASD. Got to click on the simulator first. There we go. And I can move it around. Now, here's my problem. For my game, I want the player to be on the left side of the screen, and I want him to stay on the left side of the screen. I don't want him to be able to move all over the place like he is right now. I want him to only be on the left side of the screen. So how can I control that so that the only movements he can make are up and down movements? I don't want him to go off the screen. I just want him to go up and down. So this is where that plus sign comes in handy. I've shown this to you before where we can change the speeds in the X direction and the speed in the Y direction. So let's think about that. X direction is left and right. Y direction is up and down. I only want him to move up and down. So his Y, the VY, which means velocity in the Y direction, his VY being 100 is fine. So 100 is pixels per second in the up-down direction is what that means. But I don't want him to move left or right at all. So to do that, what should I set his VX speed to? Think about it. If I don't want him to move left or right at all, what would I set his VX speed to? I'm going to set it to 0. He has no VX speed. So now, if I use... Let me reset the game. There we go. If I use my up-down, it works great. Left and right does nothing. So it's only up and down that's working right now. Now, if I go too far up or too far down, he will leave the screen. But I can fix that too. By the way, before I change the next thing and keep him from going off the screen, I have a question for you, something for you to think about. If I was to change his VY to negative 100, how do you think that would affect the playing of the game? Think about that. He had a speed in the Y direction of 100, and he moved up and down fine. What do you think would be different if I changed it to negative 100? You figured it out yet? Giving it a negative number would actually invert the controls. So when I press up, he would go down, and when I press down, he would go up. Inverted controls are pretty popular in a lot of games. So if you wanted to use them in your game, that's how you would do it, with negative numbers. All right, so I'm going to put it back at the 100 because I don't need to invert my controls. But I do want him to stay in the screen. So I'm going to go to Sprites and scroll down to these on-off switches, which we've seen before, and select the one that says Stay in Screen. This will keep him from leaving the screen when he goes too far to the top or bottom, which is going to make playing the game a lot simpler. You don't want a player to lose their controller. I'm sorry, you don't want the player to lose his character, right? If a player loses their character, it can be pretty hard to play the game. So using the Stay in Screen can be pretty helpful in a game like this. So we've got a player that moves up and down. We are ready for the next part of the game, and that is going to be creating our asteroids to come across the screen. So our first projectile, we are ready to go. Before I start making those changes, though, I'm going to go ahead and save my game. Just hit this nice little manual save here. It's a good idea when you're building a big program to do manual saves every once in a while, especially if you're going to make big changes to your games, which I'm about to make now. Okay, so as I've already mentioned, the asteroids are going to be a type of projectile, so I am going to need to use my projectile blocks. Remember, there are two different ones. It's projectiles that come from a sprite and projectiles that come from the side of the screen. We're going to do projectiles that come from the side of the screen for this part of the lesson, because we want the asteroids to not come from anything in the game, but to come from off the side of the screen. So I'm going to grab this block. I'm not putting it in the on start because when do I want my asteroids to get created? This is the big question. When do I want them to come off the side of the screen? If I put it in the on start, it will happen at the beginning of the game and it will only happen once. That's not when I want it to happen. I want it to be happening constantly, right? So this is a good time for the on-game updates. Now remember, there's two different on-game updates. If I use the one that does not have a time, that's going to be way too many asteroids. In fact, well, let's not do that. Let's not do that yet. We could play around with it later if we want to, just to show you what I'm talking about. But if we're doing on-game update, it is constantly updating. So there would be a million asteroids on the screen, and there's no way you could play that, right? We want to limit how often they're spawning. So we're actually going to use this one right here. On-game update every 500 milliseconds. So I can change that time, of course. And I need to go ahead and create my asteroid now. I'm just going to use one of the ones from the gallery. There are a number of asteroid type blocks and rocks in the gallery. So I'm just going to grab one of these big ones here. So now every 500 milliseconds, it will create a projectile that will look like the asteroid, and it will come from the side of the screen. And then it has a Vx and a Vy. The Vx and the Vy are setting the speed and the direction. So they're very important. So right now in my game, my asteroid is moving diagonally to the right and down. The reason it's moving to the right and down is because of the numbers that are currently in here. Vx50 means 50 pixels per second in the x direction. So if we're thinking about x as the left and right, positive x is right. So 50 pixels in the x direction, positive, that's positive 50. So it's moving 50 pixels per second to the right. That's what we're seeing in the simulator here. The asteroids are moving 50 pixels per second to the right. But then where it says Vy is 50, that is moving at 50 pixels per second in the positive y direction. Which direction is positive y? You might have forgotten this because we talked about it a few videos ago. But y is up and down. When we're dealing with JavaScript, positive y is down. Positive y is down. The further down the screen you go, the larger the y gets. So positive y is down. So it's moving 50 pixels per second in the positive y direction, which is down. So right now, those asteroids over there are moving 50 pixels per second to the right and 50 pixels per second down, and that is why they are moving diagonal, right? That is what's creating that diagonal motion. So if I change these numbers, they will go in other directions. In fact, I'm going to recommend you go ahead and pause the video now and put some different numbers in there. Try positive numbers, try negative numbers. See what happens if you set one of the numbers to 0, right? So I want you to play around with it. Pause the video right now, take a couple minutes, and put some different numbers in there and see the different directions that your asteroid can go. Okay, you back? Hope you got a chance to play around with some numbers. Here's what you should have noticed. As we mentioned, positive x moves things to the right, positive y moves things down. So if you change either of these to a negative, you're going to notice that it goes the opposite direction, right? So negative 50 for the x will no longer move it to the right. It will now move to the left. And if you do negative 50 for the y, it'll no longer go down, but it will now go up. So if I did negative 50 and negative 50, it will move up and to the left, which would be diagonal in this direction, like you see on the simulator there. If either of these is 0, it will no longer be diagonal. It will now only move in that one direction. So right now, if it's negative 50 in the y, but 0 for the x, it is moving straight up. It is no longer diagonal, right? Or if I did 0 for the y and I left this one at 50, it'll now be going 50 pixels per second to the right, but it will not be going up or down. It's going straight. As far as the numbers go, as I mentioned, you should have tried some different size numbers. If you go big with these numbers, let's do 200 for both of them. It'll still go diagonal, but it's now going much faster, right? What I wanted you to notice with this is that the Vx, you are setting the direction, but you're also setting the speed. So if you go with something small, like maybe 10 and 10, it'll still go that same direction, but it's now going much, much slower. It's only going 10 pixels per second. So Vx and Vy are setting the speed and they're setting the direction. For this game, We want the asteroids to go this way, to the left. So is that X or Y that we're talking about here? If it's going to the left, is it X or is it Y? That would be X. I don't need it to go up or down at all, and Y has to do with up and down. So I'm going to set the Vy to 0. So it's only going left is what I need. But right now it's going to the right because it's positive. I need it to be negative. So here's where I'm going to go ahead and put in a negative number. I'm just going to use negative 50 for now. I can always change it later. So now it's going to the left at 50 pixels per second, and it's working the way I want it to. Good. The only thing I need to fix now is where they are starting from, right? So automatically, by setting it from the side, it is going to spawn from that side of the screen, but I need it to spawn from anywhere from the top to the bottom. So I need to set, I don't need to change its X position, because its X position is fine. I need to change its Y position. Oh, I also need to change the name here. In fact, now would be a good time to go ahead and rename some of these sprites to make it less confusing. So let's rename projectile as Asteroid. And let's rename my sprite as Spaceship. This will make it less confusing later on as I'm telling these different variables to do different things, right? Okay, so I need to set its Y position to be anywhere from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen. I want it to randomly pick from the top of the screen from the bottom of the screen. I think I just gave it away a little bit. What block do you think I'm going to use now? We've used them before. It's the randomness block. So I'm going to grab a random block, and when it's setting the Y position, I'm going to put it in there. I need it to go anywhere from the top to the bottom of the screen. Well, the top of the screen has a Y position of 0. Do you guys remember the number of the bottom of the screen? What is the Y position of the bottom of the screen? This is one of those numbers I told you you're going to want to remember, right? What is the height of the screen? How many pixels tall is the screen? I hope you just shouted out 120, because that is correct. Remember, this game, the MakeCode screens have 160 pixels wide and 120 pixels tall. So now that I put that in there, the asteroids are spawning anywhere from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen. There we go. Looks like it is working. I can fly up and down. The asteroids are spawning in different areas. Now, of course, if I wanted to adjust their speed, I could. So feel free to customize this if you want to. Maybe you don't want them to spawn as often. Maybe you want them to be less frequent. So you could change the time. You could change their speed. Maybe negative 50 is too fast or too slow. You could play around with that. Maybe you want to put a randomness block in there. You can pick random, and maybe instead of doing negative 50, you want it to be any speed from negative 30 to negative 70. So give it some variety, right? So now we got different asteroids moving at different speeds. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with this. We've got a pretty decent setup. Now, right now, when the player hits the asteroid, nothing is happening because we haven't created the overlap code for that yet. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to go to sprites. I'm going to grab an overlap code. Now it says when player overlaps with player, these are not player kind. The kind that they are, unless you change them, projectiles have their own kind right here. So player overlaps with kind projectile. What do we want to happen when the player overlaps with the kind projectile? I'm just going to keep it simple, and I'm just going to put a game over in there. Now, if you wanted to, you could do something more advanced where the player has lives and they lose a life, kind of like we did with the chasing games, right? But for now, let's just do a game over lose. There we go. And of course, I could add sound effects to that and all that stuff if I wanted to. But for now, we've got the beginning of a decent little game. Although I feel like we definitely need a score or some points somewhere. So let's do something with that. This video is getting a little bit long, but I'm going to wrap it up. So this will be the early version of our game. We will add more stuff to it later. So we'll add more stuff to this game going forward. But let's go ahead and give it a point system just to have something to keep track of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the sprite section again. And I'm going to scroll down here to on destroyed. On destroyed of kind. So what this does is every time an asteroid, one of our projectiles, so on destroyed of kind projectile, I'm going to give you a point. So change score by 1. Now you might be asking yourself, we're not destroying any projectiles, are we? Technically, we haven't shot anything yet, but the cool thing about projectiles in MakeCode is that they get auto-destroyed when they leave the screen. So right now, anytime I dodge them and they leave the screen, I'm getting a point for each asteroid that I'm missing. So that's kind of cool. So yeah, we've got the beginning of a decent little game here. And I'm getting points just by staying alive as long as I can. And then if I do eventually hit one of these asteroids, the game ends. And I think this is a good place to stop. So we didn't get to add our second projectiles yet because this video went a little bit long, but we will add that in the next video. So what I want you guys to do now before you leave, go ahead and manually save your program just in case any of the autosaves don't work. You want to make sure you're protected. And then, of course, if you like this video, hit that like button, or if you learned something new, hit that like button. Don't forget to make sure you're subscribed to this channel and share this channel with other people who might be interested in building games. In the next video, we will add some more stuff to our asteroid game. We'll give the player the ability to shoot the asteroids. That'll be kind of fun. And then we'll keep going from there. Okay, so, yeah, I will see you guys later. Thank you for watching this video with me, and I can't wait to see you next time.